Hi, I'm Cora, and welcome back to Crimes Across Borders, where we explore the darkest true crime cases from Europe and beyond. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives just like this one. Today, we are digging into the full story from Kalinka's mysterious death in 1982 to the flawed investigation and the years of obsession that led one father to orchestrate an international kidnapping. This is the case of Kalinka Bamberski and the man who refused to let it be forgotten. So before we get into all the legal drama and the kidnapping, let me tell you a bit about Kalinka herself. There's not actually a lot known about her. She was 14, healthy, very sporty, good at school, happy child. She was born in 1967 in Casablanca, Morocco, to André Bamberski and Daniel. André's family actually had Polish roots, which I find kind of interesting because it shows how this story crosses not just countries, but different cultures too. While they were living in Casablanca, the Bamberski family crossed paths with Dieter Krombach, a German doctor. Dieter was married already. This was his second marriage, and he already had 2 kids from his first. Somehow, Daniel and Dieter began an affair, and it didn't just stay in Morocco. It actually carried on even after the Bamberski moved back to France. So the family eventually moved back to France, where André worked as an accountant. He was aware of the affair and was hoping that the move would give them a fresh start. And it seemed like for a while things were going well. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, Danielle's affair with Dieter kept going. She was pretending to travel to Nice for work, while in fact she was spending time with Dieter. And eventually both couples got divorced. And in 1977, Danielle and Dieter married each other. Let's fast forward to 1982. Kalinka was just 14 years old. That summer, she went to spend the holidays in Germany with her mother and stepfather, Dieter Krombach. So before we go any further, let's talk a bit about Dieter Krombach, because understanding who he was is the key to understanding everything that happened. Krombach was born in Dresden, Germany on May 5th, 1935. He eventually studied medicine in Frankfurt, earned a doctorate, and specialized in internal medicine. On paper, he had all the makings of a successful and respected doctor. But his personal life was already raising red flags, not that anyone noticed at the time. In 1963, he married his first wife, Monika Hens. She was 18 at the time, 10 years younger than him, and according to her family, she had known him since she was about 15. They had 2 children together, and from outside, it probably looked like a stable family, at least for the standards of those times. Behind the closed doors, things were very different. Monika's parents alleged that Krombach was abusive, and tragically, Monika died at just 24 years old after receiving an injection from him. The official cause of death was ruled thrombosis related to an overdose of birth control pills. Not sure how that could have happened, considering your husband is a doctor, but okay. Her family, of course, had doubts, and those doubts would grow much, much louder in the years to come. Just 9 months after Monika's death, Krombach married his second wife, Inge. Again, 10 years his junior, so obviously we can see a certain pattern here already. They moved around a lot, eventually settling in Morocco, where, as I already mentioned, Krombach worked as a doctor at the German consulate in Casablanca. It was there that he met Danielle, a French woman living with her husband, André, and her children, Kalinka and Nicola. Now, Krombach didn't end his second marriage before starting a relationship with Danielle. He eventually divorced Inge in 1974 and married Danielle in 1977, becoming officially Kalinka's stepfather. The family later moved to Lindau, Germany, where Krombach opened a private medical practice. And for years, he was seen as a respected doctor in the community. But all of that, the troubling history, the patterns, the red flags, none of it was known back in 1982. So Kalinka had been spending part of the summer with them in Germany. Her father, André Bamberski, was back home in France. Then on July 10th, 1992, he got the phone call every parent dreads. Kalinka was dead. No warning, no explanation, just gone. So, what was the official story? Krombach claimed that Kalinka had just collapsed. Maybe it was sunstroke, he said, since she's been out all day windsurfing on the lake, or maybe it was connected to a car accident she had a few months or I think even years earlier where she suffered a concussion. He wasn't sure. According to him, she came home that evening, said she wasn't feeling well during dinner, and then went to bed early. Just before dinner, he gave her an injection of something called cobalt ferlecid, supposedly to help her tan better. And later he changed that story and he said it was for treating her anemia that no one actually knew she had one. Later on that evening, around 10 in the evening, he went into her room to check on her. I think he gave her a glass of water and said she was fine and she went to sleep. Then the next morning, he says he went to wake her up and found her unresponsive. He claimed he realized she was already dead and he could see the signs of rigor mortis, but he panicked and tried to revive her with 3 different injections. But she was already dead. So as you can imagine, from the start, things didn't add up for André. And when he finally got his hands on the German autopsy report, what was found was horrifying. There was a tear on Kalinka's vulva and a white greenish substance present, as well as some fresh blood. But for reasons that remain unclear and quite baffling to this day, no one tested it. Not only that, the pathologist didn't even determine if Kalinka was still a virgin. They didn't preserve that substance either. They did state that there was undigested food in her stomach, which suggested that she died not long after eating. There were also food particles in her lungs, pointing to possible aspiration while unconscious. And then, of course, we had those 3 injections that Krombach administered to Kalinka after she died. She was clearly already gone. Any trained physician would know there's no point trying to revive someone in full rigor mortis. So why did he inject her? Not once, but 3 times. And another thing, there were no police called to the scene. Instead, Krombach found another local doctor, and then Kalinka's body was quietly transferred straight to the morgue. André claims that Krombach was actually present during that autopsy, which, as you can imagine, would be an enormous breach of protocol. But I couldn't verify it for sure. It might just be thing he suspected. In any case, none of it add up. And instead of answers, it just raised more questions. And German authorities refused to treat it as suspicious. They accepted basically Krombach's version. Case closed. So André Bamberski, this quiet, mild-mannered accountant from France, became something else. A man on a mission, a father who would stop at nothing to get justice for his daughter. And at first, he tried to do it the right way, the official way. He contacted the German authorities, asked questions, pushed for answers, but kept hitting walls over and over and over. They just told him, there's nothing to investigate. There's no crime here. But André knew better. He knew his daughter. Kalinka was healthy, happy, full of life. She didn't just suddenly collapse and die for no reason. Something happened in that house, and he was going to find out what. So he started digging, asking questions, pushing for answers. And German authorities, they didn't take it seriously. They never even questioned Dieter. They just accepted what he said and moved on. Eventually, though, they did ask for a second opinion, a professor named Wolfgang Spann from Munich Forensic Institute. He was sent some tissue samples to analyze. He realized that Dr. Krombach had been giving Kalinka the cobalt injections, and according to Spann, that made no sense. He said that even students would know these injections had nothing to do with tanning. That explanation, it was a total bullshit. Cobalt was sometimes used to treat anemia, sometimes, but it was such a risky drug, dangerous even, and it was only used in very rare cases. Especially when injected after eating, it could cause nausea, vomiting, and even lead to respiratory failure or cardiac arrest. So suddenly that detail from the autopsy, the traces of food found in Kalinka's lungs, it started to make a lot more sense. And this also poked a huge hole in Krombach's timeline. He said he gave that injection before dinner and that he seen Kalinka around 10 in the evening. It didn't make sense. It suggested he wasn't being truthful with the police and maybe never had been. Professor Spann also asked for something crucial, Kalinka's genital organs, so he could run further tests. But when he made the request, the original forensic doctor gave him vague, roundabout answers, nothing clear, some deflections. And eventually, it was certified that those parts had been buried along with the body. Just like this. Potential evidence gone, no chance for proper testing, no explanation for why they weren't preserved in the first place, nothing. So it felt less like a mistake and more like someone didn't want those tests to happen. And despite all of those suspicious things, after this, the case was truly closed on the German side. So despite the fact that Professor Spann raised some concerns, there were evidently things that didn't add up with the timeline and with what Krombach said happened, the German authorities still closed the case without any further investigation. So André wasn't satisfied at all. He knew that Krombach had changed his story multiple times. First it was a heat stroke, then the car accident, then something else entirely, same as the reason for the cobalt injections. He was a doctor. You would think he would also try to push for answers to know why his stepdaughter died, but he was not interested at all. And Danielle, his wife, was just kind of like going along with what her current husband said. From what I gather, she didn't even speak German, so everything was organized, sorted by Dieter himself, and she just went along with it. At this point in time, André turned to France. Kalinka was, after all, a French citizen, so there was a possibility for opening the case here. But things were moving painfully slowly. Finally, in 1985, 3 years after Kalinka's death, French authorities decided to exhume her body. And as a side note, I'm not sure I mentioned it before, I think I didn't. After her death, Kalinka was transported back to France and buried in a small town near Toulouse, where she was originally from. So that made things for the French authorities a little bit easier. They didn't have any, German red tape to exhume the body. And during the new autopsy, French forensic experts immediately confirmed something shocking, or actually maybe at this point might not be shocking for you at all. Her genital organs were missing. They had been removed and never reinserted during the original German autopsy. That evidence at this point was completely gone. The French team also noticed major inconsistencies in toxicology report from the original doctor. Things, again, I've said it so many times in this video, but things weren't adding up. Their final report concluded what André was already suspecting this whole time, that Kalinka was in perfect health and that the only possible cause of death was the series of cobalt injections given by her stepfather, Dieter Krombach. They said the death had to be sudden and violent, happening right after the injection, not hours later as Krombach had claimed. That wasn't a tragic accident, it was starting to look a lot more like a crime. So when I said this was a painfully slow process, I really was not exaggerating. The French forensic report, the one from Kalinka's exhumation, was finally completed in 1988, a full 6 years after her death. And still nothing moved. It wasn't until 1991, 3 more years later, that the Paris court finally notified German authorities they were officially charging Dr. Krombach with murder. Of course, Dieter pushed back. He challenged the results, tried to discredit the French tests, basically doing whatever he could to avoid facing justice. But in 1993, the Paris Chamber of Accusation wrapped up the preliminary investigation and formally sent the case to the Assize Court. A trial was finally coming. It was delayed a few times, no surprise there. And finally, in 1995, the court delivered its verdict. 15 years in prison for causing the death of Kalinka Bamberski. Though the charge was reduced to unintentional homicide, which honestly still feels questionable, but it was something. It was a trial in absentia because Krombach refused to show up, and while the court couldn't prove sexual abuse due to the missing evidence, for André, that was a huge step forward. You can imagine, after more than a decade of fighting, he thought that maybe he can finally rest. But it's not the end of this story. Not at all. Because Germany refused to recognize the verdict. They straight up refused to extradite Krombach to France. So once again, Dieter kind of walked free. And André was left with nothing. No justice, no peace, and no closure. I don't know if Krombach thought that was the end of it, but he seriously underestimated André here. So André started campaigning again. He gathered documents, gave interviews, wrote letters, not just to lawyers and judges, but to journalists, politicians, anyone who would listen. He filed appeals, launched lawsuits, tried everything he could through the legal system to bring Krombach to France. And as much as he was trying day after day, Germany kept saying no over and over again. They refused to extradite Krombach. They said he was already investigated in Germany and that under no bis in idem, the legal principle, meaning you cannot be tried twice for the same crime, they were done with it. Nothing else they could do. I watched the documentary on Netflix, My Daughter's Killer, and in it, André says he went to Lindau with leaflets that he would pass on to people during Oktoberfest. And on them it was written, Krombach killed my daughter. And he was eventually arrested by German police and ordered to pay a few thousands, I'm not sure, it was I think in German francs. He was ordered to pay the money to Krombach. How? Makes me a little bit annoyed. Anyway, meanwhile, Krombach just kept going. In 1999, he divorced Danielle, Kalinka's mom, and apparently it was because of his constant cheating, which he openly talks about. Then 2 years later, in 91, he married yet another woman, again, over a decade younger than him. I mean, at this point, it's no surprise even. Again, that marriage ended in divorce just a few years later. Same reason. Then came 1997, and the world got a glimpse of who this man really was. On February 11th, a 16-year-old girl named Laura went to his clinic in Lindau for an endoscopy. His assistant was out for lunch. Krombach brought her into the room and told her the procedure would be painful, so he gave her an anesthetic. I think he expected the anesthetic to completely knock her out. Unfortunately for him, she was actually awake and seen him on top of her during her assault. So Laura went back home, told everything to her parents, and they went to the police. And 6 months later, Krombach stood trial in Germany. Lab tests had confirmed the presence of his semen, and Laura's testimony was clear, detailed, and devastating. So he was finally convicted of raping a minor. The judge revoked his medical license and sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Yeah, with all that history, 2 years. But at least it's something, right? But then the same judge suspended the sentence. Why, you may ask? According to the judge, Kronbach had no prior criminal record in Germany because, in France he was a convicted murderer. And in Germany, he was still a respected member of community. Yeah, you heard that right. A respected member of community, convicted of murder in France, but, borders, so it doesn't count. So he was convicted of raping a 16-year-old and, basically walked free. I've actually seen an interview with him where he casually says something like, well, the girl didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either, so obviously she wanted me. And he sees that with this disgusting grin on his face. So outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, and among them, 6 more women who came forward and said they too had been assaulted by Kronbach. They stayed silent for years, some because they were drugged and didn't remember everything, others because of who he was in the community. They were scared. They were scared no one will believe them. They were scared people will blame them. And now that Laura had spoken up, they found the courage to come forward. But all of this did not matter. German authorities did nothing. The judge suspended his sentence, and again, the case closed. They completely disregarded all of the statements due to lack of evidence. It didn't matter that this was clearly not an isolated case, not an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a horrifying serial pattern, but they just let him walk. So aside from having his medical license taken away, Kronbach didn't face any real consequences. Actually, even that didn't stop him. He forged a new license, moved to another city, and just kept practicing medicine, like nothing had happened. So yeah, if the system wouldn't bring Kronbach to justice, André would. And in the years that follow, André didn't stop. He kept traveling to Germany and to towns near the borders with Austria and Switzerland, thinking maybe, just maybe, Kronbach was slipping over the borders now and then. He wasn't a cop, but he became his own investigator. Again, he was handing out flyers. He printed leaflets with Kronbach's face and the Interpol notice warning people that France was seeking his arrest. He plastered them in towns, left them in the train stations, hoping that someone somewhere would recognize him, and hoping that maybe one of these other countries would do what Germany wouldn't, which is arrest him and send him to France. And then finally, something almost happened. In 2000, an Austrian police officer riding a train actually did recognize Kronbach from one of those leaflets, and he arrested him on the spot. And for a few brief weeks, it looked like justice might be coming. But again, no. Kronbach's lawyers stepped in and convinced the judge that the French verdict, the one that sentenced him to 15 years, had no legal weight in Germany. Since he'd been tried in absentia without being there to defend himself, the court said it didn't count. And to make it even worse, at this time, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the French trial wasn't fair and ordered the French government to pay Kronbach 20,000 euros in damages. Yeah, let that sink in. He was actually being paid. The man convicted of abusing and likely killing a teenage girl was now being paid compensation. It was like a slap in the face. For Kalinka, for Laura, for all those other women, for André, for every person who thought justice meant something. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. When's the kidnapping, Cora? I promise we are getting there, just not yet. Because André was still trying. He still wasn't done fighting, not even close. He quit his job. Like, he actually gave up his entire career just to keep tracking Kronbach. His full-time mission became justice for Kalinka. He was following every lead, every whisper. And meanwhile, Kronbach was living this slippery, nomadic life, hopping around Germany, Austria, Switzerland, After losing his medical license, he would change his addresses frequently, staying in different places, doing different things. Then one random day in a town called Rodenthal, right in the middle of Germany, there was a woman who had a GP appointment. And it wasn't with her usual GP, but with some new guy, a temporary replacement. For some reason, something felt odd about him, and she decided to research him. Just did a quick Google search, I guess. And in an interview, she said she couldn't quite put her finger on it, but whatever it was, it just bothered her enough to Google him. And that's when she found out who he really was. Dieter freaking Krombach. She immediately called the police and André as well. And at this time, they did arrest him for practicing medicine without a license. So again, at least something. So let's stop here for a moment. But can you believe this? Man, this convicted rapist, this suspected murderer had been working in 28 different clinics over the course of a decade. No one ran a background check. No one questioned him. Like, how could that happen? But at least once again, Krombach went to trial, and this time a team of psychiatrists was brought in. Their findings, honestly chilling. They called him a chronic liar, a narcissist, a sexual predator with delusions of grandeur, someone who, in their professional opinion, would definitely reoffend if left unsupervised. And what did the court do with all of this? Guess. They gave him 2 years and 4 months. 2 years and 4 months. That's it. Worse, actually. He was out again after just 18 months. And I honestly can't even imagine what André was thinking at that time. I mean, I cannot imagine what the judge was thinking at that time, but it's just, I felt so bad for André, who was following the news. And I guess possibly, again, he had this little glimpse of hope that was almost immediately crushed again with the German justice system. But as I mentioned it already before, André was not giving up. He kept trying to keep tabs on Dieter, but it was getting harder and harder. And then the rumors started swirling around that Krombach might be moving to Africa. It was around then that André came up with a crazy idea. And he actually discussed it with a private detective. What if they kind of kidnap Dieter? Just to bring him to France. Of course, the PI refused outright. So once André got this idea in his head, it was hard not to think about it. He was talking about it actually in public, in cafes, bars, restaurants. People were aware of it. He wasn't hiding it at all. And after a few days, he was contacted by Anton. Anton said he wanted to help. He told André he didn't want any money for this. He just wanted to help because as a father himself, he understands what André is going through. And he just needs some money to cover the expenses. He didn't want to get into any more details, what and how will be done. He said to André that, well, the less you know, the better. Just go back home and wait for a phone call. And then sometime later, Anton found 2 Russian men, and together they kidnapped Dieter right in front of his house. Anton recalled in a Netflix interview that he didn't actually want to hurt Dieter. He just wanted to get him safely to France. He said one of the Russians even tried to cut off Dieter's penis with a knife. Like, you know, he actually, not surprised. But Anton stopped him and told him to back off. They needed to safely transport Dieter just over the border. That's it. In the end, they dropped Dieter off in the nearest French town with a police station. And from that moment, things finally started moving. They started a new trial in France. Of course, Dieter tried everything to avoid postponing hearings with fake medical conditions. I think he was even pretending to have a heart attack at some point. And meanwhile, Germany was pushing to get him back. But this time, the French justice system was firmly in charge. They got him. Doesn't matter what way they got him, they were not letting him go. And with so much media attention, things were finally taken seriously. In the end, Kronbach was found guilty of voluntary violence leading to unintentional death with aggravated circumstances. This crime in France could have mean up to 30 years in prison, but due to his age, he was only 15. During the trial, even more disturbing details came to light. It turned out that Dieter had been secretly slipping sedatives into his ex-wife's drinks, so he could cheat on her with younger women in their own home. In total, 16 women came forward with allegations against him. 16. You might be wondering what happened to André and Anton as well, because obviously kidnapping. Well, they, along with few other accomplices, were put on a trial for kidnapping and conspiracy to kidnap. I mean, mainly André, the conspiracy to kidnap. Thankfully, the court didn't come down too hard on them. Anton got a year in prison and André received just a year of probation in the end. And honestly, André wasn't afraid of going to prison. He said himself, you need to break a few eggs to make an omelette. In the interviews, Anton was also saying that he was proud to be in jail for that crime, and his whole family and his community was proud of him. So this case, I think it's one of those that stays with you. Not just because of the injustice or the years it took to get any kind of resolution, but because of the sheer persistence of one man. André Bamberski wasn't a lawyer, a cop, or a politician. He was a father. And when the system failed him again and again, he didn't back down. He sacrificed his career, his time, his peace, everything to make sure his daughter's death wasn't ignored. And same goes for Anton. He was just a random man. He was not connected to this case at all. And he risked his safety, his freedom to help this man, only because he understood how awful it is to know that your child was hurt and the person responsible is just walking free. And I find it amazing that they managed to do it, that Anton helped, and this case finally got its resolution, it got justice. It does raise some tough questions, though, about how often power protects predators, about how many people turn a blind eye, and how many more still haven't gotten justice. And if you ask me, too many. What do you think? Was André right to do what he did, even if it meant breaking the law? How would you react if that was your child? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if this story hit you like it hit me, consider subscribing. I cover true crime cases like this every week, especially those that cross borders and challenge the system. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Stay safe. Bye.